and welcome to the Wildlife Matters podcast. I'm your host, Nigel Palmer. We're talking to Natalia Doran on this week's Wildlife Matters podcast. Natalia is the founder of Urban Squirrels, a London-based specialist grey squirrel rescue, and is also an advocate for wildlife, being on the Council of Animal Aid, a trustee of Farplace Animal Rescue, and the academic charity Pan-Orthodox Concern for Animals. The grey squirrel is cherished and one of Britain's most frequently spotted wild animals, especially in urban areas, but it is under grave threat. It is also one of the most persecuted wild animals, with our wildlife conservation organisations resorting to culling. Moreover, Natural England classified grey squirrels as an invasive species in 2019, further jeopardising their survival. Our relationship with squirrels in Britain has always been complicated. Our native red squirrel species is extinct, and we are protecting imported reds from European countries. However, the main reason reds are in trouble in Britain has nothing to do with grey squirrels. It is about the loss of suitable habitat. Remember, reds are an arboreal species of pine and coniferous forests. In this wide-ranging interview, Nadia discusses many of the issues faced by grey squirrels in Britain today, and has some insightful ways that all of us can help the grey squirrels in our local areas. Today we're speaking to Natalia Doran on this week's Wildlife Matters podcast. Natalia is the founder of Urban Squirrels, a London-based wildlife rescue unit that specialises in grey squirrels rescue, advice and advocacy. In addition, Natalia is on the council that runs the national animal protection organisation Animal Aid. She is a trustee for Farplace Animal Rescue and the academic charity Pan-Orthodox Concern for Animals. Natalia, you are clearly a passionate, dedicated animal advocate and a very busy person. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, why grey squirrels and what made you want to help them?
Well, as with anybody who helps animals, really, it's about your resources and the need out there and marrying the two. And myself, I'm actually quite a theoretical person, but I study philosophy and theology. But my day job is a carer. I have 4 children. They're adults, but 2 of them have autism. And my youngest son, well, he's 31 now. He wanted to work with animals. And he's very intelligent, very capable, but also severely handicapped. So I have to be very much involved in what he does as well. So it's not just theory, it's practice as well. I volunteered for several charities in London, helping animals, wildlife rescue organizations, just, to help them, but also to get a feel of where the need was, the need that we could meet. And it seems that with grey squirrels, the need is really, really huge. Basically, squirrel placements are like gold dust. So we set up something here to help them, basically. Johnny does a lot of he does all the cleaning and feeding of the adults. I hand rear the little ones and do advocacy when and where I can.
That's fantastic. So a great team between you, and obviously helps you to help Johnny with not only doing what he wants to achieve, but also fits in, shall we say, to making it a viable life.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I guess that may answer why you set up Urban Squirrels.
Well, yes. And the reason the need is so great is that squirrels, they occupy a strange place in this country, don't they? I mean, many people, especially in the cities, absolutely love them. And they are the only diurnal wild mammal whom city dwellers will see. And also they are kind of, they form friendships with people very quickly. I get those phone calls. People would say, oh, well, my squirrel, this and that. And I've learned to kind of clarify, your squirrel in what sense? And mostly it turns out that it's a squirrel they've been feeding in their garden, in their park. But it is a very real friendship. And gray squirrels are particularly good at that because they are intelligent. It's not just like a wild animal who slowly over weeks or months becomes habituated to the human presence. They problem solve. Within the space of one day, the squirrel will say, okay, I'll come a bit closer. Nothing happened. I'll come a bit closer. Okay, it's fine. So before we know it, they're taking food from that person, they're sitting on their lap. And it is a friendship that benefits both parties. The squirrel has the food and even veterinary care. When he or she needs it, the person gets the animal companionship without the responsibility of having an animal. And many London dwellers can't do this for financial reasons, for practical reasons. They move, they work. They can't have a live-in companion animal, but the friendship with the squirrel fulfills that need in their life. And it's an interesting paradigm as well. There is admittedly, an extreme section of animal protection, of animal rights people who think that we should not have companion animals, that it's actually animal exploitation to have pets. Now, I don't feel that, but this friendship with gray squirrels that people have is an interesting paradigm for human-animal relations. The friendship where the animal remains free living, but gets the benefits of human companionship.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are so interactive, aren't they, once you get to know your local ones? And
yeah. But of course, when something happens to these animals or they're young, a rescue placement is needed. And that's where the trouble starts, because squirrel rescue placements are like gold dust. They are this invasive aliens. I don't like this terminology, but they are an introduced species. Basically, you need a license to keep and move them. In the past, we could have a license to keep them and a license to release them. Several years ago, the release licenses were, well, actually all licenses were revoked at some stage. It was quite awful. But now, after campaigning, we can keep and move them, but we still can't release them. We have to keep them for the rest of their natural lives. Not many rescue organizations want to get involved in this, so squirrel placements are few and far between. And the need is huge. So it is actually quite a tragic situation in the rescue.
Yeah, incredibly difficult because it's such a different thing, isn't it, between the rescue side of helping an animal get over an illness, an injury, whatever it may be, and then in general, they can recover from that in a reasonable period of time. But of course, you've got this unique situation now with this so-called, and I really don't like that terminology either, the so-called invasive species.
It's actually quite awful, and even using that language,
It is.
I feel that we're almost kind of being implicit in something. It's extraordinary how kind of biased and emotionally laden that terminology is. If you kind of unpack even the word invasive, it has this emotional layer of help, we're being invaded, immediately giving it a certain spin. And actually, I can give it a positive spin and say successful species. And interestingly, the scientific facts behind it would be exactly the same. You just give it a negative spin of invasive or positive spin of successful. I think it would be far more appropriate to talk about widespread species. And even alien, it has this extra layer of alien from outer space, something that doesn't belong here. But this alien, doesn't belong, is a value judgment. It's not a scientific fact. So again, if we talked about introduced species, widespread introduced species to me would be far more appropriate for scientific discourse, for legal discourse, rather than this biased and emotive invasive alien species. But yeah, well, that's what we have to deal with.
I couldn't agree with you more. The whole lot is wrong. Our terminology, our way of thinking, it's just so incredibly biased. I get that. So with the current situation, I think you've explained it, but obviously you can take them in and help them, but then you have to give them a permanent sanctuary effectively, which I can understand that clearly it has a limited resource, especially in London, but wherever you are, there's going to be a limitation on numbers, there isn't there?
Well, absolutely, because a lot of our clients are babies, orphaned babies. When builders do some work and find a nest, tree surgeons disturb a nest. And well, actually, it's always good for a mother to allow the mother to come back. And very often she does, but not always. So yeah, those babies are hand-reared. Then they need to go back into the trees. They rewild really, really well, again, because they're intelligent species. But we can't do that anymore. And now that puts pressure on, tremendous pressure on rescue centers. That's why, I mean, to be honest, for Urban Squirrels, that is quite a focus of the campaigning side of things. It all, well, basically the pestilential bit of legislation is the Invasive Alien Species Order 2019. It's a remnant of the EU legislation translated into British law. And essentially, before Christmas 2018, we all the organizations that deal with grey squirrels got this awful Christmas present from Natural England, the licensing body, as saying basically that this legislation was coming in, all our licenses are revoked, and all the squirrels on our premises have to be euthanized. Now, I'm happy to say that there was a public outcry against it. All the major newspapers commented on it. Urban Squirrels ran a parliamentary petition, a successful one in as much as lots of people supported it. The government had to respond. And we received this kind of partial victory. I mean, the vets were for us. The RSPCA spoke about it as well. We got this partial victory of at least being allowed to keep and move them. But the release prohibition stands. Urban Squirrels attempted to challenge that through the courts. We attempted a judicial review of this legislation. Unfortunately, it was unsuccessful. The initial hearing, the judge was actually very pro us. She kept praising the work that we do. But there is there was no way the current legislation can be interpreted in such a way as to allow release. So the next stage is, to change the legislation or amend the legislation. Well, realistically, everything will have to wait till after the election now. But then the next move would be to wait for legislation to start coming through Parliament that has something to do with animals or something to do with the environment, and try to splice into that a clause saying if grey squirrels are taken in from the wild for welfare reasons, they can then be returned into the wild, something like that. So it's very much work in progress. And in the meantime, we have to make do. One way forward is to try to license as many new sites as we can. So I'm very happy to advise people, rescue centers, even individuals, on how to go through the licensing process. Essentially, you need an outside aviary that is compliant with Natural England requirements. Then you get a vet inspection, just your own vet. You arrange your own vet to inspect and send off the papers. And actually, it hasn't been difficult. Natural England has been giving out those licenses. And actually, that can be for a very small number of animals, like 4 or 5 animals. That's absolutely fine. It creates some placements. And you don't even have to, if you're a rescue center, you don't even have to absolutely rescue 4 or 5 squirrels. You can do a nil return in your report. But I would certainly encourage anybody who can to get a license to keep squirrels, so at least we can create some more placements.
That's fascinating. I didn't realize that it was within the reach, shall we say, of some individuals. Obviously, you've got to have enough space to have the appropriate aviary.
Well, absolutely.
Realistically,
unless you're good at DIY, it will set you back a couple of £1,000s. But there are also grants out there, so do call us. It is possible. Squirrels have friends. Some of those friends have money. All of those friends have votes. So we should work together.
That's fantastic. I'm really encouraged by that. It looks like a hard-fought victory to get at least to the point where you could keep them. Obviously, could see the restrictions of that's an almost impossible situation.
Another difficulty is that in the face of this legislation, many large rescue centers decided not to deal with squirrels at all. And when they get phone calls from the public, this is quite a bit strange what they say. Legally, we can't help them anymore. Well, they can't because they didn't bother to keep up their license. I mean, not all of them. Tiggerwinkles, that's the largest wildlife hospital in Europe, isn't it? That still takes in squirrels. Whitby Wildlife in the north. But several centres around London, no point in naming and shaming, but basically they stopped helping squirrels. They cite as a reason that they don't believe in keeping animals in captivity. So I always think it's important to uncover the ethics of captivity, because, obviously they say we don't believe in keeping animals in captivity. Well, who does? I mean, I don't know any of your listeners would ever say that zoos are a good thing, for example. But it is a nuanced issue. And I think it's important to draw the first line of demarcation between animals kept in captivity for human profit, for human entertainment, for human education even. I don't believe this is acceptable. And keeping animals in captivity for the sake of the animal, because the animal is disabled and will not survive in the wild, or because the animal is, as in our case, it's not legal to release them back into the wild, and the only other option is death. And the other line of demarcation is, well, it's kind of about the conditions the animals are kept in. Obviously, if you're just collecting squirrels in a small cage, like some kind of animal hoarder, it's not acceptable. But if the animals have decent conditions, and in the case of squirrels, where they can run, they can jump, they can climb, they can dig and bury their seeds and nuts, they can build a nest, then I believe it's better than death, really. And I mean, we can do a little thought experiment. How would we feel? I mean, we are animals, we are mammals. So how would we feel? And yes, if we were kept in captivity, kind of in a small room on bread and water, probably we would rather die. But if we're kept in a large room with the internet, with a computer, with books, with good food, exercise machines, and knowing our friends on the outside were fighting for our release, then I would certainly prefer that to death.
Definitely. There's a lot of hope in that situation, isn't there? So I get that totally, and agree that it's very nuanced, because in principle, not a good idea to keep animals in captivity zoos, etc., for our entertainment. But this is a very different situation, so it's very nuanced. I believe you've recently, though, been able to open a second centre of Urban Squirrels, which it sounds very exciting. So
Absolutely, yes, yes. We've opened a new site in Harrow. Again, well, we just basically got a grant from Lush Cosmetics. Thank you very much, Lush, to set up the equipment. Got our vet to do the inspection, and we're off. Basically, Nadia Raud is the person who runs it. She actually did a rather dramatic rescue yesterday. We got a phone call about a squirrel stuck in a so-called squirrel-proof bird feeder. Poor thing, it was obvious from the picture that the squirrel was quite young. So Nadia just quickly washed off her hair mask, grabbed wire cutters and gloves, and jumped in an Uber to go and set that squirrel free. And she didn't even need to cut it in the end, just needed to twist the squirrel a bit. He ran off. That is still legal. It's important to, I just want people to know that although it's illegal to take a squirrel in captivity and then release it back into the wild, it's legal to release in situ. Essentially, if a squirrel is stuck, well, anywhere in your room, in your loft, in your shed, in your bird feeder, and you just open the way for him to run off, that is legal. The RSPCA, well, it was tested. Basically, they released a squirrel from a bird feeder, and they either went through a court case, or at least there was legal advice, but it was the precedent was established. It is legal to release in situ, which is what we did yesterday. Lucky squirrel. And lucky Nadia didn't get bitten as well.
yeah.
Anyway.
Well done to Nadia. And I mean, that's fantastic. But I also didn't realize that. So again, that is really helpful information. But
well, it's important for humane pest control. There is actually such a thing. It is possible to do pest control or human and wildlife conflict resolution without killing animals. Humane Wildlife Solutions is a company that does that. And obviously, if there are squirrels in the loft or something like that, they shouldn't be there. They should be evicted. They don't belong in people's houses. It is because there is an access point. And actually, squirrels are sometimes helpful. You find out there's a loose tile or something because the squirrels are there. That might have saved your life. The squirrel kind of showed you where the hole was. So the way forward is to do up the access points. And usually as the workmen come in, squirrels don't kind of hang around. They run off, and it's absolutely legal to shoo the squirrel out of the loft when you're carrying out this sort of work.
That's great information. Moving on a little bit then. So if somebody finds a grey squirrel that needs help, and it's outside of your coverage areas, although you're desperately trying to expand them, I appreciate that all the time. What would be your advice on what that person could do? This is assuming this squirrel needs some treatment as well, rather than just releasing it.
Yes, that's right. Well, there is actually a directory called Help Wildlife UK. I'm sort of naming a lot of organizations here. It's an online directory. I know the people who run it. They run it on very solid, ethical, basic on their principles. We also, people on it, the rescue centers on the directory, have to renew their listings quite frequently. So it's a well-run directory. There you enter the species. Well, you choose from a drop-down menu, choose squirrel, enter your location, and it will show in concentric circles the rescues near you that help squirrels. It may be near, it may be a little bit further away. I mean, unfortunately, most of them will show we're full or temporarily or whatever. So it's not a kind of a panacea, but the directory is there and it's well worth checking out. It's also, I mean, once you've found out who your nearest rescues are, it's worth giving them a ring to see whether they have any ideas. There is, I mean, people are going to hate me for saying that, but there is obviously, as you can imagine, an underground rescue network. And the way to find it is in social media. But I mean, to be honest, everyone knows that. Friends and enemies of grey squirrels know that. But for a member of the public who's stuck with a squirrel, it's worth looking on social media as well.
Yeah, that's great advice, and nice to know that there is something out there. As you said, squirrels have got friends. Some have got money, some haven't. Some can help, some can't. But there's usually someone somewhere, shall we say, if you are determined enough to keep looking, which is great news and a big relief, I have to say. Because
our website urbansquirrels.co.uk is being updated, but I'm also going to put some information there on temporary care, as in for a few hours or maybe overnight, when it's possible, when it's not possible, how to do it. With babies particularly, it's important not to try to give them milk, because that can get in, well, first of all, cow's milk will not be digested, but also it can get in the lungs and cause pneumonia. So it's important to put all your energies into keeping the baby warm and finding a rescue placement.
Yeah, really good advice. And that goes for a lot of mammals in a very general sense, doesn't it? The cow's milk is generally not the right way forward.
I love it when my vet always says, well, you know, cow's milk is not appropriate food for other mammals, and no milk is appropriate food for adult mammals. I've never asked him whether he was vegan or not. I always want to.
Yeah, I would agree with him wholeheartedly on all levels, and being a vegan would not drink that ever again. But there you go, we're all different. I know if you're keeping some of these squirrels and you're having to look after them in the long term, that there must be, because they're so charismatic. I just wondered if you had a story, or one or two, however many you want, but of one or two that you've had in your care that have maybe stood out to you for some reason.
Well, absolutely. I think our most charismatic squirrel is Pip. He is on a lot of our merch in our online shop. If there is a photograph, it's most likely to be Pip. And he is severely disabled. He is paralyzed from the waist down. And actually, many vets, many rescue centers, most, I think, probably say, well, such a squirrel should be put to sleep. But he is very mobile. He's like a Paralympic athlete with his upper body strength is amazing. He climbs everywhere, climbs up the cat trees, climbs up other squirrels' cages all the way to the ceiling. He's also quite tame, actually. He climbs up to I have to wear a coat of some sort because his claws are sharp, but he climbs up to my shoulder. Pip is absolutely amazing. We have also, it's all those kind of surviving, guess the odds stories that I absolutely love. We have a couple of severely neurologically disabled squirrels whose balance is very bad. But they pick up a nut, they prop themselves up against something, they get by. They're amazing survival stories. And Nadia at the new Harrow site has a very, very tame squirrel called Spot. He's mildly neurologically disabled, but he's ridiculously tame. He really is. You cuddle him, examine his teeth, anything, especially in the evening, is very cuddly. And actually, Spot is going to have his own book. We're in the process of publishing a children's book, and Spot is going to be the main character. We've just, the illustrator has just finished drawing really fantastic. We spent a long time looking for an illustrator. We didn't want to use photographs because that's, social media is full of photographs, including our own. So they are artist drawings. Lots of them. Is going to be just a sweet story about, based on Spot, not exactly Spot. Because in that story, there's a family of squirrels who come into rescue just to show what rescue is like. It's a different concept. Basically, it doesn't have the strong advocacy in it. which I do all the time whenever I get a chance to do so. Thank you very much for giving me a chance to do so. The myth busting, the kind of let's be kind to gray squirrels. This is just a sweet story about a gray squirrel, but no big deal is made of the controversy surrounding gray squirrels. And I think it's just another tactic to try. We actually failed to get a grant for it because for the fantastic grant making body, they wanted something a bit more cutting edge, a bit more kind of animal rights oriented. And absolutely, I understand that. And I do that. It's just not quite within their remit. But here, for my sins, I read policy statements on those who kill gray squirrels, cull, manage, control, all those euphemistic words being used, which means killing. The latest thing I read was from the Welsh government. And actually there it has it has to have a section on the problems with their plans to kill grey squirrels, the obstacles. And the number one obstacle they've come to mention these days is public opinion. People don't like the idea of squirrels being killed. And this is where I actually want to push our advantage a little bit as well. Let's just keep presenting positive grey squirrel content. Not controversial, not polemical, just they are lovely animals who just want to live.
Absolutely. And I agree totally. There's a place for advocacy, and we're very much into that and trying to let more people know about some of the issues that are going on in the wildlife world. But I also think when you're trying to engage children, particularly, that isn't necessarily the time. If you engage them with the animals and they become squirrel lovers, like most of us are, then they will naturally pick up on the issues and most likely become advocates as they develop. But you need to engage them firstly on what charismatic animals they actually are. And when you've spent a little bit of time around them, I have worked in a rescue, and it was pre, shall we say, the licensing changes. So grey squirrels were a part, as were every other native, or not native, but every other wildlife animal within the country anyway. And obviously I'm aware of that change that went on as well. But they are incredible, especially as babies, so engaging. So it's just the way when you do feed them, which was syringe feeding back then. I don't know if that's changed, but the way they will actually clasp onto it, and you just can't help but fall in love with them, really. And I know as they get a little older, they start to get a bit nippy, and certainly from a rescuer side, having done badgers, foxes, deer, the only one I will ever wear gloves was if I went to a grey squirrel, because I guarantee it would be hanging off my fingers if it wasn't. And
these are the teeth that crack walnuts. So
exactly, you know when they bite you, and they don't let go very easily. But forgive them all of that, obviously. I think maybe now is an excellent time to bust some myths, because there are so many surrounding the greys, but specifically, I suppose, the grey versus reds. And I'm just wondering, with somebody with all your experience with squirrels, but also in a wider animal advocacy situation, just to hear your version of this ongoing issue between reds and greys. I wondered what you thought about that.
There is so much to say. I don't want to be like that poor donkey that died because it was thirsty and hungry and couldn't decide whether to go to the water or the food first. There is a lot of information on our website. There is a section for essays on urbansquirrels.co.uk, including that kind of red versus grey. And I think that, the most important thing I would like to put across is that red squirrels virtually disappeared from the British Isles before grey squirrels were introduced. And that is the soundbite that I think is pivotal to the discussion. A lot is made of the competition factor. And it is true that in most present-day British habitats, grey squirrels would outcompete red ones. Grey squirrels are far more adaptable in terms of habitat. Red squirrels need ideally extensive pine forests. They can't stand fragmented habitat. Whereas grey squirrels can cope with all that. They can even cope with the ecological mess that is our cities. In terms of food, grey squirrels are more adaptable. They are, let's say, quietly more intelligent, etc., etc. But even if there were no grey squirrels in this country, red squirrels would still struggle because of habitat issue. And that is proved by the fact that they struggled to the point of extinction before the greys were introduced. Actually, the British subspecies of the red squirrel, Sciurus vulgaris leucurus, is extinct, unfortunately. The squirrels living in this country today are genetically a mixed bag. Some studies were made using a museum specimen from the 18th century or what have you, and present-day red squirrels, and it revealed patterns of repeated introductions from continental Europe and breeding from them. And actually, the Daily Mail, of all people, ran this article saying, "Tufty, you're not as native as you think." But that is something else, this kind of native red squirrel. It's not that native. But actually, this whole nativeness narrative is also slightly suspect because, well, habitats change. And an animal that thrived in a habitat 300 years ago is not necessarily going to thrive in the present day habitat, whereas an introduced species can become an accidental but good ecological fit. So the big question is, why is the history of dispersal the criterion of who belongs and who doesn't, rather than present day ecological fitness? And to me, it would be more natural to think of present day ecological fitness as the criterion of who belongs if he doesn't, if we need such a criterion, because, well, the habitat chooses the animals. Otherwise, what we seem to be doing is hammering this square peg of the red squirrel into the round hole that is the present day British habitat. And of course, red squirrels are not, when we talk about, conservation, we need to save the red squirrel. They are not an endangered species. Their conservation status is least concern. And they're kind of widespread from Scandinavia to Turkey to Siberia. Wherever the habitat is correct for them, they do thrive. Unfortunately, not in this country. It would have been lovely to have them, but not at the expense of killing grey squirrels. That is where I think that's where the ethics come in. And there is science and there is value judgment. And these are two different things. I mean, we could say that killing everybody over the age of 60 would solve the NHS crisis, but we're not necessarily going to, hopefully not going to do that. And it's pointless to say to us, "Oh, but are you flat earthers who deny the science?" Or, "Oh, don't you feel sorry for all the people waiting for hours and hours in A&E?" Well, yes, we do, but we're still not going to solve the problem like that. The solution is worse than the problem. And I think that is certainly relevant for the grey versus red debate. A lot is made of the pox virus. I think, well, Wildlife Matters has covered that before in a podcast. But really, what I wanted to bring to the table is the exaggeration factor. The pox is a disease that grey squirrels carry, and they don't seem to be dying from it. They're immune to it, but red squirrels do die from it. But the mechanism of transmission is such that the red squirrels are far more likely to get it from fellow reds rather than from grey squirrels. And yes, the first red squirrel might have got it from a grey squirrel, but it would remain an isolated tragedy if red squirrels were not artificially maintained with shared feeders, where red squirrels can't socially distance. They have not evolved to live in such close proximity to each other because they are being maintained in conditions where, in habitats where they can't feed naturally, they have to rely on the shared feeders and they get diseases from it. The pox is one of them. There are many diseases, and that's another thing that is important. The data showing that the pox can kill off the red squirrel population, until recently, it was based on citizen science, where people would pick up the carcass of a poor red squirrel with these symptoms and report it as the pox, and it would be fed into the computer. And as we know, the computers work on the principle of garbage in, garbage out. If you put this data in the computer, that's what it will give you. But actually, when those carcasses were taken to the laboratory, it was found that the pox cases were 0 to 18%. Laboratory tests show. The rest was other diseases, but the computer data, essentially 0 to 18% accurate on the pox virus. That's maybe a bit niche, but for some reason, disease is made a lot of in the red versus grey debate.
Very much so, because I think it suits those who want to put that emotive argument. But the logic to me of killing all the greys to save the reds, when if you were going to have any interaction, you think in my head, you would be looking at how the greys have got immunity from it, and maybe we could help the reds. I don't know what's possible scientifically. I'm not a vet, not a scientist, but you would think transferring that immunity, were that to be feasible in any way, would be a far better way forward than
Well, absolutely. And
killing all the
actually,
others.
there is some research suggesting that about 10% of the red squirrels do survive and develop immunity and can pass immunity to their offspring. As at the moment, any red squirrel that is still alive when found is just killed. Well, or at least that's what I understand. To me, the priority should be nursing it to health, as should be the priority with any wild animal. And with viruses, a lot of it is about nursing, a lot of it is about treating secondary infections, and then releasing them back into the wild with the immunity.
Very much, and quite pertinent for us as a species who 2 or 3 years ago went through a worldwide virus pandemic.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, if we'd have adopted a similar attitude, should we say, to anybody who picked up that, it's inconceivable that we would do that, but somehow we will do it to squirrels or other species, but not ourselves, which makes us hypocritical, and that's being as polite as I can be, I think, at this stage. But yeah, fascinating, and a really good explanation that I think, as you say, you that is such a big subject, but you really got to the core of it, I think, in a very succinct way. So thank you very much for that. It's not
No,
easy to
not at
do.
all. It's actually, you mentioned it might have been a throwaway phrase of people who want to persecute grey squirrels. I think that has to be flagged up as well. That when it comes to the environment, when you think about what is threatening the environment, it's intensive farming, it's climate change. But how do we tackle that? That is incredibly difficult for the government to tackle. You come up against very powerful vested interests. But what about grey squirrels? There we go. We'll look like we're doing something for the environment without actually doing anything, and without
Exactly.
alienating anybody who matters to the powers that be. That's the problem.
Very much so. And with other species, not for now, but like badgers, and the whole badger
Exactly.
cull
Yeah.
situation
Mm.
is another
Yeah.
version of,
Mm,
oh, look,
mm.
we're doing
There
something.
are lots of similarities. Yeah.
Yeah, which is wrong. But anyway, that's a whole different subject.
Mm.
The other thing greys get accused of a lot, and I'm not even sure it's really relevant, but they get accused of damaging trees and causing millions of pounds worth of damage and ravaging bird species and things like this. Which, I mean, I don't know the actual truth, so obviously I'd love you to explain a bit more about that. But what is the truth on?
Well, again, it's a big subject. Again, much more information on on our website, urbansquirrels.co.uk. But the main it is pseudoscientific myth making, and the main mechanism of it is exaggeration. When it comes to trees, yes, squirrels do feed on trees. Yes, they can eat buds and leaves and even strip the bark in order to get to the sap, the jelly underneath. But statistically, it's not that frequent, and certainly to kill the tree, you'll have to ring bark it, and squirrels don't actually feed like that. But what is very strange is squirrels are actually some of the world's greatest forest regenerators. They plant new trees, and yet they are accused of destroying forestry, exactly the opposite. Well, I think there are different, well, a naturally growing forest is one thing, where squirrels planting seeds and nuts is uniformly beneficial. Actually, grey squirrels are quite clever. They want to keep their seeds and nuts safe from potential thieves, other squirrels or birds, so they will often go to the edge of the forest, to a slightly more dangerous place, and bury the seed or nut there, so the forest can naturally creep out like that. But plantations are different, sticks in the ground are different. But even there, the Forestry Commission actually conducted research into grey squirrel damage in 2015, found it to be 5%. Yes, it does exist, but it is statistically acceptable. To destroy the forest, you'll have to destroy 30% of canopy trees. Squirrels don't manage that, just 5%. There was a tranche of studies that came out several years after that, alleging the damage to be much higher, in some cases significantly higher. But as is very often the case, the argument is in the detail. These studies did not actually look at a single tree. They were questionnaires sent out to people like pest controllers, gamekeepers, landowners. I think you know where I'm going with that. Essentially, the methodology was one huge conflict of interest. The people asked the questions about grey squirrel damage to assess or their grey squirrel damage were the ones who stood to benefit financially from either directly in the case of gamekeepers and pest controllers or indirectly in the case of landowners hoping to get grants for killing grey squirrels. And the birds, again, well, there was a government-funded study that concluded that the presence of grey squirrels does not affect the bird population. Squirrels, well, grey or red, are opportunistic feeders. They can take an egg or a chick, but that does not reduce, they're not predators. Their activity does not reduce the bird population. But I think mostly that is purely people who take almost sadistic pleasure in killing. They would use that fig leaf, oh, I like birds, therefore I shoot squirrels.
I mean, a lot of mammals that we love and are on the other side of the fence, should we say, right now to the greys, such as hedgehogs, are also opportunistic feeders. And if they find a nest of, it's ground nesting birds in their case, not necessarily all of them, but a hedgehog will definitely take eggs. But yet we love them. And then we persecute the greys for doing a very similar thing. And that is very hard to, in my head, I don't understand how we do this. Speciesism basically is a very wrong thing.
Exactly what it is.
So, but fascinating insights again. One thing I'd like to sort of do is how, or what would you like our listeners to do? How could they help squirrels and help urban squirrels in the work that you're doing?
Well, public opinion is, as I said, our main weapon. And now that we've got social media, it's very quick and easy and free for anybody to support grey squirrels by sharing positive grey squirrel content. Ours, obviously, we're very active on Facebook, on Twitter as well. We have some presence on Instagram. TikTok is less so. TikTok is all about funny videos. We do have some, but not every day. So basically, like, comment, follow, share, because the algorithm works in such a way that the more you do it, the more it will show it to other users and basically spread the message. As any charitable organization, Urban Squirrels always needs donations. So if you can, there's a donate button on the website as well. But really, goodwill is what we need the most.
That's fantastic. And we've got obviously your website and all your social media, and I will put the links in the episode description at the end. But the website I'll just mention again now, it's www.urbansquirrels.co.uk. And the Facebook and all the other things I will definitely put into the description with links
from the website anyway.
Yeah. So one way or another, they will find you and hopefully do something. I would love to hear if anybody is interested in setting up a potential run in their garden or land that they've got that's appropriate. It would be lovely if obviously you contact Urban Squirrels and go through that route, but it'd be lovely to get some feedback to see if anybody actually does do that from talking today. That would be amazing and would be very helpful for the squirrels mainly, but for everybody else. So one thing we like to do when we're talking to guests here on the Wildlife Matters podcast is just ask a couple of questions that aren't directly related to what you do, but obviously are in the wildlife thing. So that we pick these randomly, but do you have companion animals? And if so, can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yes, I have my Georgian princess, Suti. She's a large dog, a large fluffy mutt. I went last year, December, I went to a conference in Georgia, the country, not Georgia, the state in America. And I came back with a dog. I went to a shelter. I knew there's a shelter there that does great work in trapping and neutering street dogs. Some of them end up in shelter either because they're tiny puppies or because they're disabled or because they're perceived by the community as aggressive. Anyway, Suti was a tiny puppy when she was found by the side of the road. And they, believe it or not, they couldn't rehome her in Georgia. The situation is so difficult. If you can't rehome a happy, healthy, fluffy puppy, whom can you rehome? And so she was 1.5 when I met her. And she's now in London and taken to London life really well. There's a little bit of a debate as to whether street dogs adapt well in homes. Suti never lived in the street. But she was basically in shelter for a year and a half. But genetically, she's a street dog. But I find that they're really adaptable. She's fine. London public transport, London cafes, parks, you name it. She's fine with all that. Because, yeah, street dogs have to be adaptable. And that's really important. They're not bitey. If you settle anything with teeth, you're not going to survive in the streets for very long. And you won't pass your genes. So yeah, street dogs are above all not aggressive. So I think that's great. I mean, it was a hard decision for me because we lost our elderly dog back in October, and it was horrible. It really was. I was in hospital for a while. It was really bad. But then, well, I find I talked obviously to a lot of people. I find that those who lost the dog they really loved get another one either straight away or not at all. And it's not, I mean, you always worry whether am I trying to replace my dog. It's not like that. It's almost like defiance of death. It's almost like you're saying to death, well, yeah, you can make it really horrible, but I'll still do it. I'll still do it again. So yeah, it's not well. And also another friend, a friend of mine said, if you're waiting for a time, you will not miss your old dog. You will wait for the rest of your life, essentially. It'll never be a time when you won't miss your dog. But yeah. So yes, that's Suti, my Georgian princess.
Oh, she sounds absolutely amazing, and I
Okay.
know I can see her and others can't, but that
She's
is a
with me now. I'm stroking her now.
yeah, that's a lovely, lovely story. And the other thing, and I guess you may have answered this in various ways, but like that, what one thing needs to change to help grey squirrels in Britain, and is that likely to change in the next 5 years?
I'm going to take a very wide swipe at it and say that the main thing that needs to shift is speciesism. This attitude that humans are special. Well, I mean, we are humans, so we consider ourselves special. I'm a person, I consider myself special. But we need to realize that animals are not here for us to use, to exploit, or to manage. Even this kind of idea, we're here to manage wildlife. We're here to manage our own impact on the environment. That should keep us busy for a while. So I think speciesism does need to shift a little bit. Animal rights is a scary kind of expression for most people, but it shouldn't be. That is something that does, I think, need to evolve. And I mean, people kind of shy away from animal rights. Or what does that mean? That my dog has to go to university? It's absurd. Well, rights have to be meaningful. Yeah, we were not talking about, say, a biological male does not have a right to abortion because it's meaningless. And equally, an animal for a dog to go to university is a meaningless right. Rights have to be meaningful to the creature. Treating everyone equally doesn't mean treating everyone the same. Again, it has to be relevant and meaningful. And I think that is something that is changing in society. Well, obviously, the rise of veganism. I mean, commercially, vegan products are swinging back and forth, but I think it's happening. It's happening slowly, but I think it is happening, and it will impact grey squirrels as well as all animals.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer, and I also believe the younger generation. I have huge hopes because they seem to be far more attuned to that we are all animals at the end of the day, and we all live in this world, natural world, urban world, whatever version of it we're in. We all live and share the same space, and we should be aiming to do that in a way that doesn't mean that we use them or take advantage of other species who are basically just trying to live in the same world that we are. We have no rights over them in that way. So yeah, and sentience and a lot of other things are really, really important that we get to that stage. And speciesism is one of the biggest obstacles, without any shadow of a doubt. And well, I mean, this has been absolutely fascinating, and I've learned so much from chatting with you today.
Thank you.
I thank you for taking the time to speak to us, and please do keep us updated with the work of Urban Squirrels, and we would love you to come back and update us at some time in the future.
Well, thank you. I hope I have a happy update for you soon. But that at the moment is rather hoping against hope, but never mind. Thank you.
Never mind. We've got to keep optimistic, and you've got a clear plan for going forwards. And yeah, I wish you every success with that.
Thank you.
And thank you for finding the time to talk to us today.
Thank you.
hope you found Natalia's discussion valuable today. I certainly did. I also hope it has inspired some of you to take action, advocate, share positive stories and news about grey squirrels on your social media platforms, and uphold the positivity that Natalia radiates for grey squirrels in the future. Wildlife Matters encourages anyone who can get a squirrel aviary in their garden or on land that they own. Nadia and her team at Urban Squirrels can guide you through the licensing process and may even help you obtain grants to help fund the aviary and the equipment that you need. The show notes include links to Urban Squirrels' website and social media channels, but it's worth repeating their website address as it contains all the information you will need, so get your pen and papers ready. The website address is www.urbansquirrels.co.uk. That's www.urbansquirrels.co.uk. Wildlife Matters will be at the March for Nature in London on the 22nd of June, and we will be recording a live podcast. When you see us, please come over and tell us your name, the group or organisation you associate with, and most importantly, why you are marching for nature. We would love to hear from you and some of your personal stories. So keep your eyes open. And I'm really looking forward to shouting out for nature with as many of you as can get to London on the 22nd of June. Wildlife Matters will return in 2 weeks' time to share our unique adventure with a solstice theme that we know you will enjoy. Until then, keep a wild heart and a curious mind. I have been your host, Nigel Palmer, and this is Wildlife Matters, signing off.